What's up, everybody? Jordan Stewart here from Vover. Thanks so much for tapping into the Vover original show. Just a reminder that if you want to drop your opinions about the episode or respond to the host and guests with your voice, go and download the Vover app wherever you get your apps. Vover, voice over everything. Enjoyed the show.
What's going on, Vover Wrestling? It's Wednesday, so you know what that means. It's time for another edition of the 3 Count. I am your host, Regular Scott, and this week we are going to take a look at NXT and talk about 3 things that they can do to improve their product. Last week we talked about Raw. Next week we're going to talk about SmackDown. We're going to get through this state of wrestling. WWE has a lot they need to work on. So without further ado, let's get started. So NXT, as in that, I'm sure some of you have seen the rumors going around that NXT is going to go through somewhat of an overhaul. You know, there's going to be some changes going on. They're going to go back to the basics. It's going to go back to, this is a purely developmental brand, and we're looking for big guys and young guys. So none of these older guys and none of these smaller gentlemen. Obviously, Adam Cole is an exception to the rule because if he goes to AEW, that's a pendulum swinging move right there. Now, one of the things I want to clarify before I get to my 3 things is obviously probably the biggest thing and most important is to have some type of stability with as far as your talent not always getting called up whenever they get super hot. You know, whenever they get super hot and get over and people are talking about them and they're the buzz, that's when they get called up. So that's obviously the biggest thing that would help. If they had stability, that would take care of a lot of other issues. So I'm not even going to talk about that because that's just an obvious, you know, anyone who's watched and seen how the call-ups have gone, you know, especially a guy like Keith Lee, you look at him, he had all the momentum in the world. They rushed the title match a little bit, but then they rushed the cross match, him losing the title. He should have had at least 6 months on top. You know, I like what they're doing with Cross. Let me rephrase that. I like the idea of Cross debuting as NXT champion, you know, on the main roster while still being champion. I hate this idea that he has to be losing. Like, why didn't they just do what Kevin Owens did? Kevin Owens was the perfect example and always has been the perfect example of how you call somebody up. First night, you interrupt John Cena, leave him laying, have the NXT title, and let him know your U.S. title is not nearly as big as my NXT title. There was no better call-up than that right there. So that's obviously the biggest thing. I just wanted to get that out there, make sure nobody's like, how come you didn't mention that? There you go. That's the biggest thing, but it's an obvious thing. So I want to go over 3 other things that I think will really help NXT. Starting at the top of my list, there are no surprises with NXT. You know, one thing you can always count on, you're always going to get a good match. You're always going to get a good women's match, and you're always going to get a good main event. And usually, it's the women's match leads off in the men's main event. Or sometimes you'll get a men's main event, and then a men's match will lead off, and the women will main event. But they're always bookended with 2 really solid matches. But in between there's not a lot to write home about. Nothing is bad. You know, very rarely is anything bad. Most of it is good wrestling. It's polished. It's clean. But there's no surprises. You know, there's no unpredictability going on with this brand. You watch it and, you know, you kind of know what's going to happen. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing to do what needs to be done and do what the obvious thing is. But every now and then you need a surprise. You know, the boost of energy, the jolt of life that Finn Balor brought to the brand a couple years ago when he moved back. I mean, that was huge for them, and it felt like a big deal, which is what it was supposed to do. You know, it felt like a big deal, him coming back, and he was treated like a big deal. Samoa Joe coming back has felt like a big deal. You know, the silly booking on Raw with Cross has hurt that match a little bit, but Cross is still Cross on NXT. You know, he's still that guy, and Joe is still that guy no matter where he goes. That was a nice boost. You know, that was a nice jolt of energy that was missing. You know, that's been missing from the show, and now it's kind of like, where do we get it? You know, Frankie Monet was a nice boost. You know, a nice little jolt of energy. It wasn't quite a surprise, but when you don't get a lot of different and just, not by the numbers. There's a format to NXT, and I think that's a problem. You got to change some things up, man. They just need some unpredictability on the brand. If that's a random attack, maybe they go after William Regal this time. Like, you need something to generate interest, and it's got to be something unpredictable. NXT is a brand that lacks unpredictability, that lacks that oh my god moment. Adam Cole giving Kyle O'Reilly that brainbuster on the steel steps on Raw or SmackDown, that's a pretty tame thing. On NXT, that's a big deal. Now, to be fair, that's probably a good thing. They've built themselves up to the point where a spot like that means something. And that's good, because that means you're not overdoing it and you don't have to kill yourself trying to do these crazy spots to get a huge reaction. But you still need some unpredictability. You need more of that. And that doesn't mean always have to be in an attack. Maybe you let somebody cut an off-script promo. You let them just go at the champion. When Johnny Gargano and Kyle O'Reilly were undressing Cross on the mic, and Adam Cole too, it was a big deal because you didn't hear that type of stuff often. We need more of that unpredictability. You need something like that. And I think a return, and I'm going to get one of my points later on is about returns and people coming in, and I think you need some of that. So that actually leads me to my next point, as far as I think that NXT, especially with the way they're going to start using them as a true, not a third brand, but a true developmental system. I think you need to start sending some main roster men and women down there for about a year or so, 6 months to a year at a time, and let them go refresh, work with some younger talent. Let this younger talent work with different men and women coming in. A guy like Bobby Roode, I like the tag team with him and Dolph Ziggler, the Dirty Dogs. And honestly, you could bring the Dirty Dogs down, and they could just run roughshod in NXT, and it would feel different. It would be that jolt of life. If Ziggler and Roode come down, if Roode comes down and goes back to his glorious gimmick and Ziggler's his number 2, you could easily have Robert Roode, NXT champion, Ziggler, North American champion. Those guys are, they're main roster guys. So to some of the WWE audience, they would be presented as bigger deals. And I think that would be a jolt of life that they could use. And I think it would also help those guys on the main roster. And I use those two as an example because they're not really doing a lot. A guy like Chad Gable, that would be a good way to bring him down, let his heel persona run. Otis, let him get built up that way. On the women's side, you could send somebody like Asuka back down. She's been so overexposed on the main roster. She was always on TV, always wrestling. Me personally, and I've talked about this, I'm not one that thinks your champion or your top star should be on TV every week because it dilutes them and they should feel special. When they show up, it should feel special. That's what kept Brock special. People can hate on it all they want, saying he wasn't there every week. That's what kept Brock special. And Asuka's not special anymore. Send her down to NXT for 6 months and let her run around with that roster, man. Let her have fun with that roster. And I think it would do wonders. Somebody like Naomi could go down to that roster and do a lot of good things. I like that they're bringing Mandy Rose down. She's not the greatest of wrestlers. She's gotten better. But I like that they're bringing her down. It adds a little bit to the roster. And now you can bring her back up to the main roster in 6 months. She feels a little bit special. She feels different. I'd love to see a guy like Xavier Woods get a shot at get a main event run in NXT. Since he's not doing a lot right now on Raw. Obviously, they're going for the tag titles. And until King of the Ring comes back, they're not going to do anything with him singles-wise. I'd love to see something like that. Ricochet. You're not doing anything with these guys. Let him go back down to NXT for a few months, have some classic matches, and when he comes back, he feels fresh. He feels brand new. He feels different. I think NXT's got to kind of be I don't want to say a territory, but just kind of a recharge spot because it benefits both. It benefits the young wrestlers they're working with, and it benefits these veterans that are coming down, wrestling these younger wrestlers who are hungry or coming in who are going to come at them, and it's just going to be a different feel. I think it really would be beneficial both ways. And my last thing that I want to wrap up with, and this may be a little bit of a controversial pick, they got to get out of the CWC, at the very least for takeovers. It was a cool setting for the pandemic, and it is a cool visual to look at. If it does feel different from the main roster, but it doesn't as major league, as big league. My wife, she'll sometimes sit through some wrestling with me, and she'll watch Raw, SmackDown, NXT like I do. And when we watch NXT, one thing that she always brings up is it just doesn't look as big league. Are these the smaller guys waiting to get called up, or waiting to get promoted? Is that what these guys are? And in a way, that's kind of what it is. And it feels like that. And to somebody looking in, to somebody who's not a hardcore wrestling fan just looking in, that's how it comes off. Even if you're just doing it for your takeovers, and I could get with that. You got to go to big shows. Even if you're not selling out a 10,000 seat arena, if you're just going to a different venue, a bigger venue with thousands of people, which NXT can 100% do, you may not sell out venues anymore like you used to with 10,000 seats, and you probably could actually, but even if you don't think you can easily sell out a couple thousand seat venue, and it would feel different. It would feel like a bigger deal. It would feel like a bigger card, a bigger match. You need that. This takeover coming up, it's takeover. They're going to put on great matches, but it's going to feel just like a special NXT show instead of a takeover. It's going to feel like the In Your House they did on NXT instead of feeling like a takeover. Like it's going to be on a Sunday night. It's the main event, and it's going to be at the CWC. That doesn't work for me. That doesn't feel like a Sunday night pay-per-view following SummerSlam. If this was a takeover from 4 years ago when they were in front of a 10,000 seat arena putting on the best matches of the weekend, man, I'm all for it. That feels like a big deal. That feels like a Sunday night main event following SummerSlam. Going back to the CWC just feels like a step back. It feels like a TV episode, and that's a problem. It's a problem that I'm talking about TakeOver 36 and it potentially feeling just like a regular episode of NXT. And like I said, it was great for the pandemic. I'm not saying never go back there, or even it could even be your home base, but I mean, once a month, once or twice a month, every other week, let's go somewhere. Let's go to a different venue and just have a different setting. Even if it's a smaller venue, if it looks different, you get a different audience. It's a different feel, different energy. I mean, people on TV pick up on that. Wrestlers pick up on that. There's a whole thing to just having a different vibe to the setting and just seeing something different. So I think that's a big thing. They have to get out of the CWC, especially for takeovers. Takeovers have to feel like a big deal. Well, that's all I got, man. We did it. We knocked out all three right there. You can find me on Twitter at knee4marvelversedc. That's the number 4. You can also find me on the Vover app at Regular Scott. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's anything else you think that NXT needs to do to improve, or if I'm completely missing the mark with this. Guys, I enjoy doing this. It's a lot of fun. Next week, we're going to talk about SmackDown. SmackDown is one of the better shows, so it'll be interesting to see what we come up with that SmackDown needs to work with, because there's definitely some things that they can work on too. But as always, y'all have a good time, because we're going to have a good time until we talk to y'all next time. Peace.
Vover.